XYZ Shylock gives out fixed interest loans to borrowers. It obtains the money to lend by borrowing at the 1-month variable MMR. To protect itself against interest rate risk, it enters into a 1-month forward FRA contract on the 1-month MRR. Which of the following best describes XYZ's interest rate exposure and the position it should take in the FRA contract? It's exposed to a rise in the 1-month MRR. It is because it's borrowing at this rate and lending at fixed rates. So if this goes up above what they're lending at, then they're going to be in trouble. And so therefore should be the fixed rate payer. This sounds correct in the exposure that we want. In other words, we're currently paying and floating, and then we're receiving fixed. So we want to do the other. We want to receive floating, pay fixed. So fixed rate payer. A sounds good. Exposed to a rise in the 1 month. That's right. And should therefore be a fixed rate receiver. We're already receiving fixed rate via the loans that we're giving out. And we're exposed to a decline. We're not exposed to a decline. A decline would actually be good because then we'd be borrowing at a lower rate and then lending that out fixed. Answer A. Consider a 1-year call option on a non-dividend stock. The current stock price is $70. The value of the perfectly hedged portfolio, the combination of call and underlying asset, after 1 year is $16.50. If the hedge ratio is 0.65 and the risk-free rate is 1.5, the no-arbitrage price of the call option is closest to. So we're going to be using this formula here, which is going to be our hedge ratio times our stock price. So this should be in parentheses here. So 0.65 times 70, and then we're subtracting out the value of this back to the present value. So we're going to take the 16.5, discount this back to the present at 1.5% for 1 year. And that gives us a call option price of 29.24. Answer B. A 3-month call option with an exercise price of 38 is being sold for $6.50. The underlying is currently worth 42 and the risk-free rate is 3%. Assuming put-call parity holds, a put option is being sold for. So let's pull in our put-call parity formula and we'll work through this. It's going to be the call plus the bond equals underlying plus the put. We're going to rearrange that. So now we have our call at 6.5, which is given to us. X is going to be our exercise price. And we're going to discount that back at the risk-free rate for 1 year. Or sorry, not for a year, for 3 months. So that can be seen here at this 0.25, since 3 months is a quarter of a year. And then we're going to subtract out the underlying, which is $42. When we work through that, we get 2.22. Answer A. A US-based company has a subsidiary in Germany from which it expects to receive $8 million in the next 3 months. If the company's management is concerned about foreign currency, it will most likely enter into A. Currency forward contract by taking a short position. In euro. Currency forward contract by taking a short position in USD. Or forward rate agreement by taking a long position in euro. So we're a US-based company. We're expecting to receive euro, 8 million. So this would be a long position in euro because we're expecting to receive it. So if we want to hedge this out, we want to take the opposite of this long position. So we would want to be short euro. Answer A. And so this would essentially be doing is if we're going short that 3-month contract, we're agreeing to sell at that price in 3 months. So when we receive our 8 million euro in 3 months, we then can turn around and sell that at the price in our forward contract for US dollar. Which is what we'd want this to be in since that's our domestic currency. Answer A. John Cabot, a derivatives trader at AFK Bank, takes a long position in 200,000 June 2019 gold futures contracts. Which of the following parties will most likely have the opposite position to the futures contracts? Is it A, the clearinghouse, B, a mix of retail traders and investors, or C, other derivative traders at large banks? So C would be applicable if we were trading something like forwards or swaps. but these are futures contracts which are traded on an exchange. And exchange traded contracts are not going to have a counterparty on the other side, being a large bank. They're also not going to have a counterparty outside of the clearinghouse. The clearinghouse is the counterparty. There could be retail traders and investors that are taking that opposite position, but in this scenario, we're asking who has the opposite position, who is the counterparty. The counterparty that we would only have to worry about for default purposes is A, the clearinghouse. So that's our answer. Call options are primarily purchased by investors who are A, bullish, B, bearish, or C, risk averse. So this one is going to be bullish, and the reason is call options are the right but not the obligation to buy the stock at a certain price. So if we can buy the stock at this price and the stock goes up to here, we're going to be able to buy here and sell here. So if we are bullish, meaning we think the price is going to go up, then we would be buying a call option. Bearish would be applicable to a put buyer or a call seller. And risk averse, normally risk averse investors would not be investing in derivatives because they tend to have embedded leverage and just potentially more risk than buying the underlying securities. Answer A. An investor that enters into a long equity forward contract on a total return stock index will be concerned about the management of A, price risk, B, the uncertainty of dividends, or C, both price risk and the uncertainty of dividends. So this one's going to be C. Price risk is always going to be a concern with an equity forward contract, but the key here that we want to include dividends in this is this part right here, total return. So for a total return stock index, it's going to take into account all the price increases, and it's going to take into account all of the dividends received to determine our return on this forward contract. So for that reason, we will go with answer C. A long-term European put option will always be worth more than an otherwise identical short-term put option if A, volatility is lower, B, interest rates are lower, or C, interest rates are higher. So I think it's helpful to look at this formula when distinguishing this. And this is mainly going to be looking at B and C. So let's rule out A, volatility is lower. So if volatility is lower, this is going to make a longer term option not worth as much more. When volatility is high and we have a longer time horizon, that's going to make it more likely that we end up in the money. And so that's going to make it worth more with volatility being higher. So then between interest rates lower and interest rates higher, let's look at this formula. So rates, we have this, our put call parity organized for puts, and we have interest rates right here. So interest rates is discounting this value, and this is a positive value. So if we have interest rates go up, we're going to be discounting X at a greater value, which is going to make X go down. And since this is a positive value, this value is going to go down. It's going to make the put also go down. So the opposite would also be true. It's going to be worth more in the case of interest rates going down. It's going to make X, or our exercise price, go up, which is also going to make the put go up. So all else equal, we're going to be looking at B, interest rates lower, as our correct answer. A property owner is considering a lease agreement that includes a clause for annual rent increases tied to the inflation rate. In this context, which of the following statements is most accurate? A, real estate always offers protection against inflation regardless of the lease agreement terms. That's going to be incorrect. And I would say in general, staying away from answers that say always or never, these extreme terms, is usually not going to be right, because there's sometimes some nuance that would make a statement correct depending on what's in the question. Especially regardless of lease agreement terms. If they didn't have these rent increases tied to inflation, then it certainly would not protect against inflation. B, the ability of real estate to hedge against inflation is solely dependent on the terms of the lease agreement. That's also incorrect, because we also have the appreciation opponent part of real estate. So we get our rents that we're collecting every month, or our cash flow, but the building that produces that cash flow can also go up in value. And sometimes when inflation rises, that can also lead to buildings and real assets to rise. C, the ability of real estate to hedge against inflation can be influenced by factors such as the terms of the lease agreement, geographic location, market segment, and time period. That all certainly sounds accurate. It's the most broad answer as well, and sounds like it'll be the one for us. Answer C. An analyst gathered the following information regarding a fund. Total shares outstanding, 500,000. Assets, liabilities. The net asset value of the fund is closest to. This is going to be a pretty straightforward calculation. We'll do assets minus liabilities, divide by number of shares, which we're given all those inputs. Gives us a NAV of B 1.4.